Righty. Share my screen. Good afternoon. Good afternoon. Righty. Good afternoon, everyone. Alrighty. I will go ahead and get started. So good afternoon and welcome to the BCALA Gamifying Your Library Programming webinar. I am Tamala Chambers, and I am honored to be your moderator this afternoon and amongst a group of esteemed panelists. I am currently the manager of the Beverly Branch Library, located on the south side of Chicago, and have had the privilege of serving all ages from 0 to 80 and probably even older than that, as both a children's and school librarian. In a former life, I was also a game room attendant at our on-campus game room at the University of Illinois Urbana-Champaign, which for a college student into games was like having unlimited power. I'm a fan of traditional games like Uno, Spades, Backgammon, Monopoly, Life, and Mancala, and have owned and played every Nintendo Entertainment System since the original one in the 80s. My current favorite gaming pastimes are distracting myself with Toy Blast or Tetris on my phone and trying to convince my sons to challenge me in the dance games, but they won't because I know I'm always going to win. It is my pleasure to introduce our panelists for the evening. Annalisa J. Purdy is a senior librarian with the New York Public Library System and currently works at the County Cullen Library in Harlem. She received her MLIS from St. John's University with a concentration in youth services. She uses both text and digital sources to introduce subjects to young patrons, helping them get acquainted with STEM technologies such as 3D printing, as well as exposing children to historically based activities and reading material. The first game that she remembers being enamored by was Pac-Man. She's currently interested in Sagrada and has long been a fan of the Call of Duty series. Annalisa enjoys introducing a variety of game formats to young patrons, as well as learning from them about new trends. Our next player, player 2, Opata Riche Ade Falalu, received his MLS from the I School of the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign in 2017. He is currently the children's librarian at the Lower Mills branch of the Boston Public Library and previously headed teen services for the Inglewood Public Library. Riche is a lifelong gamer and has run multiple library gaming programs, both in person and online, including chess, tabletop role-playing tournaments, and virtual reality. His genres of choice are horror and role-playing games, and his favorite since high school has been The World Ends With You. Player 3 is Brittney Morris, the author of Slay, The Cost of Knowing, and Marvel's Spider-Man Miles Morales, Wings of Fury. She has written for video games, including The Lost Legends of Redwall, and Subnautica Below Zero. Brittney has an economics degree from Boston University and spends her spare time reading and playing indie video games. So it's question time. We want to get a temperature check of the people or the participants today. So here's a question for you. What was the first game or gaming system that you remember truly enjoying and why? Please feel free to drop your answers in the chat. And we won't ask anyone's ages, we promise. However, if you know, you know, and I will openly admit that I've been playing video games long enough to have owned the ET game for Atari, which almost, if you know about that, almost single-handedly ruined the video gaming industry. And I really enjoyed playing Stampede on my Atari 2600. So let's see, we have here. Space Invaders, Atari, Super Mario World 3, which was awesome because Mario could fly. Donkey Kong, Hubert, Pac-Man, Sonic, the original Nintendo, Pac-Man. Fantastic. Fantastic. I see some CPL people. Hi, Jordan. Hi, Alinka. Fabulous. PlayStation Spiral. Dream Daddy. Pac-Man. Pong on Atari. Mortal Kombat. Yes. Okay. So now I am going to turn it over to Annalisa, who is going to explain to us the many benefits for young gamers. I know the benefit for me was a lot of reading or kind of practicing those reading skills. So she's going to tell us about that and highlight a few more. Welcome, Annalisa.
Thank you so much, Tamala. Hello, everybody. Thank you for joining us on this slightly cloudy day, and happy Veterans Day to everyone as well. So we're going to start by talking about, as mentioned, some of the benefits that come from offering games at the library. And there are many benefits, but I've boiled them down into the basic three under which all of the others fall. So the first one is, of course, interaction. When you're playing a game with someone, the fact that you're interacting with another person, whether it's online, whether it's in person, whether you're talking, whether you're not, is something that's of great benefit to everyone, but especially to teens and tweens as they're getting acclimated to the library system and going through different changes in life. So different gaming programs allow young patrons to work in each other in a setting that's controlled and that's safe from any interference. Notice I said controlled and not necessarily regimented, because even though there are going to be some parameters and rules that are in place, and Riche is going to talk about this some more in detail later on, we don't want it to be in a situation where it's very strict and regimented to the point that they can't explore what they like. And this is also a great way of introducing young patrons to their fellow gamers, some of whom they may know, but may not have interacted with before, others whom they do know and get to spend more time with, and to get introduced to staff who are also interested in different concepts. It's also important to remember that just like with everyone, some teens or tweens may be shy in interacting, regardless of what the situation is. That's okay. Some people, it takes a little longer for them to open up, but even if they're a little more reserved or more reticent about joining at first, it doesn't mean that they're not getting the benefits of participation. And having the library be that space in which they can participate is extremely important. These two children, for example, at the roller coaster STEM challenge from about almost 5 years ago at the library, for example, did not want to be next to each other at first. Each of them wanted to operate this system by themselves. They went to the same school actually as well, which was interesting. But over time, they found that building their own roller coaster together with these materials was much more fun than doing it by themselves. And it turned into an interactive experience for both of them. And they, all along with others, continued to show up for the rest of the program. Next slide, please. Whoop. And look at these wonderful children, teens, tweens, playing that game of challenge called Uno, which can get extremely intense. And we all know about this. This is just a general overview of some skills acquired through gameplay. Obviously, one is empathy, interacting with each other and understanding how to know what each other's playing style is, what each other's gaming style is, and seeing that through the game through each other's eyes. Another one is, of course, education about a myriad of subjects. How many of us, for example, have learned something completely new from Jeopardy or from Trivial Pursuit, which I'm also telling my age a little bit here, but it's okay. It's all good. Another one is obviously technical knowledge and computer literacy, which is extremely important, especially in today's world that is increasingly moving towards STEM for all ages. The more that they interact with and learn about different concepts of the games they play, the easier it becomes for them to talk to their friends about it. But it's also something that helps them as they move on through life, as they continue to graduate high school and go on into pursuing their education or in interacting with others. And another one is the memorization and other soft skills such as critical thinking and adaptability and learning how to work with others as a team. These are definitely important social emotional skills that everyone can benefit from. And for the tabletop games especially, but also with virtual games, anyone remembers the arcades know that using that joystick takes a lot of effort. The fine motor skills and swiftness that it takes to go back and forth, especially as one progresses to different levels, are some of the skills that they can get to. Next slide, please. Okay, and this is a video from the aforementioned roller coaster challenge in which the teens were constructing a roller coaster out of materials. They built this themselves without any input from us or any of the other library staff. They started constructing it on their own. Our main job was just to make sure that everyone stayed safe, which they did, of course. And as you can see, the larger marble dipped in the middle, but they found a way around it to keep constructing it. And it was really fun. I wish we could have fit all of the others in here, but this is just a sample of some of the skills that you can see evidenced in the way that they built this roller coaster. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, and benefit number 2, diversifying your library's offerings. So it's an obvious one, but the more of a variety that you offer to your young patrons, the more that you as an information professional get experience with understanding how to operate these different systems too. And it helps to make your library distinct. Now, this isn't to say that anyone should stop offering, for example, a virtual chess program if they notice that other libraries are offering that program too. That's fine. The distinct character and nature of your library and the teens who come to your library is going to make sure that that program, regardless of what it is still an enjoyable experience. This is also important because it helps broaden your teens and tweens outlook on life. It exposes them to different games and systems that they might not see otherwise. This was during International Games Week in 2017, the picture in the middle. This was a portable Go game. This game exists in many different cultures and it goes by many different names. This is the Go version. These teens were a little skeptical about this at first, but once they understood the rules, they were completely engrossed in it. And we ended up keeping this Go set and pulled it out during afternoons when they would come in from school. But it was something that they were interested in. And it also got these, there were 3 of them in particular, interested in other international games as well that we help them research. This also helps attract more teens who can spread the word about what's available. Like, wait a minute, they've got Google Cardboard viewers at the library? And they can tell their friends or their siblings or anyone else in their group who they think would be interested in. And that helps to bring traffic into the library itself. And also diverse programs logically lead to a diverse audience of teens. And this is in every sense of the word. Diversity in terms of playing styles, of interests, in terms of how they relate to each other. it all helps to add to the library. This is also a great opportunity for information professionals to continue to service the community in a way that allows them to expand on their skills. If you, for example, know that you're interested in Mahjong or Mancala or the original version of, say, Chutes and Ladders, or you have a great interest in The Sims, this is a chance for you to share with your colleagues to help share with the teens. And I also want to make an important distinction that this level of benefiting by diversifying your library's offerings can exist both in person and online. Both formats, as long as their dedication is there and the commitment is there, can help bring teens together. So nothing is lost if someone switches from in-person to virtual or back and forth, depending on what the program is. Next slide, please. Okay, and for the last but certainly not least benefit about strengthening the relationship with the library. And this is one that takes time and takes effort, but it's one that has the most lasting impact on the teens and tweens under your purview. This is a Martinetti game, which is a very old dice game that's suitable for all ages, but helps with cumulative counting skills that we held in the library. And this was held during one of our many summer reading, summer learning activities. So gaming programs help the young patrons to view the library and, of course, the library staff as extensions of their world and also extensions of their interests. This is the opportunity for them to play games that are also common with them at home, or that they may not get the chance to have access to in an environment that's safe. And for you as an information professional, by strengthening the relationship with the library, it helps you to understand your teens and tweens on a different level. There's a way that you can connect with someone while playing a game that you might not have been able to connect with them otherwise in a setting that's pretty much, I don't want to say flat, but that's a little static during the activity of the gameplay. It allows you to learn more about their lives and for them also to learn more about you and to help build up that relationship of trust. And this leads as a gateway into more meaningful conversations with your teens and tweens, and also the chance to introduce them to the library's collections, for example. If you find that you have a very dedicated group of Minecrafters at your building, for example, this is an opportunity to introduce them to different books about Minecraft, for example, the encyclopedias or the guides to different areas such as farming and how to construct buildings and different strategies about gameplay. So it all ties together. And accessibility is another big component of this, because the library may often be the only place where they can find out about different programs. So this is a great way for you to, again, strengthen that relationship, but also establish the library as a place that's willing to provide that for them. And you always want to make sure that their voices are being heard, that their interests in different games, or I don't like using the word obsessions, but they're great passions for these games are important, that you're interested in them, and that the library is the place that'll help enable those passions for them for the future as well. Next slide, please. Okay, and here's just a showcase of some of the many different gaming opportunities that we've held at our different libraries over the years. I wish I could have included them all in there, but we've got Bloxels at the Woodson Regional Library, and look how excited everybody is. We've got Among Us from the Boston Public Library, and this is an example of a virtual program as well. We've got the teens on the left, librarians on the right with these wonderful avatars, and everyone's engaged. And we've got some Scratch games, which were held at the County Cullen Library, in which the children program their own characters in Scratch and then use the robotics kit in order to act them out. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Riche, who's going to explain some more about different strategies that you can use for incorporating games into your library. So take it away, Riche.
All right, thank you, thank you. Good afternoon, everybody. Looks like the sound is coming through all right. So our next part of the presentation will be about running your own gaming programs at the library, just some tips and advice on starting that up if you haven't already, or if you have already, just hopefully some things that'll help build what you've got. Next click, please. So we're going to look at this in 3 levels. A first level is going to be passive programming. Next click, please. Oh, yeah, yep. So what I mean by that is just providing access to games for independent use. So these won't be programs that you supervise directly. You just kind of have the kids playing on their own, doing their own thing. So not as much of a time commitment. Next click. So some low cost options, as we talked about, playing cards, board games, chess sets, you know, the classic things that you can find at any store like Target for just a few bucks. Next click. And then you can look at some bigger budget items if that seems interesting for your patrons, things like video games and consoles. And then role-playing game materials. I saw some discussion of things like Dungeons and Dragons. So for those, there are those rule books that can be kind of expensive. So that's another thing the library can provide. Next click. And then those items can be for in-library use, or you can make them available for checkout. We actually check out video games at the Boston Public Library just the same way we check out books. I know that can be a little scary sometimes since they are expensive, but it's gone pretty well. We haven't had too much trouble with it. Next click. And another great thing with passive programming is that it's a low commitment way of gauging interest. So before you make a huge investment into all sorts of equipment or things, you can just have a few options for kids to mess with on their own. And you can see what things they gravitate towards, which things they don't. And that'll give you a direction as to which things you will want to build into larger programs going forward. Next click. So as some examples, this is my desk at the Boston Public Library at the Lower Mills branch. I just keep a chess set out at all times just to see how much interest there would be if I were to start a chess club. And, you know, when kids come in, some of them already know how to play, so they'll play with me, or they'll take it and play with one of their friends. Or kids who don't know yet, they might ask about it and want to play with the pieces. So it's just a really easy way to find out how many kids would be interested if I start that up. And these pieces I just found in the back, and the board there is actually made out of paper. So when we say low cost, we mean really, really low cost. You don't have to break the bank to get into this sort of thing. Next click. And another example with video games, one of the UMedia locations for the Chicago Public Library. UMedia is a great teen space where they provide teens with access to a lot of different creative media activities, one of them being video games. And a lot of the spaces they have setups like this, where there's a TV, a console, controllers. Kids can just come in, sit down, start playing. Next click. So for level 2, looking at more organized play, another click. And so with that idea, that's when you actually schedule collective play as an event that you'll be there supervising it. It'll be something maybe you do weekly or bi-weekly, and it'll be hopefully something that can be set at a regular routine. Next click. So a few prerequisites for that, one more click. You're going to want to think about what space you want to use, make sure it's a suitable space, depending on how many people, how many kids you're going to have coming in. You want to make sure that they'll be able to comfortably fit in there. And hopefully you also want the space to be somewhere that's a little bit separate from the main section of the library, so that when things get a little bit loud, when people are talking, especially if they're video games and the video game has its own sounds, you don't want that to be a disturbance for the rest of the library. So you really want to think deliberately about where you're going to have the programs. And you can also consider having virtual programs, as we've talked about a little bit. Now, using things like Twitch or whatever other online platform you like, that can take some more technical knowledge. But if you're willing to invest and you have the time for it, it can really be a big benefit. We actually used that a lot during the pandemic while we were still closed here at the Boston Public Library. And we were able to build a pretty strong teen following just using Twitch and a few free online games. Next click. And our next consideration, which you always want to think about whenever you're having any program, is adequate staffing. So making sure that you're choosing a time when the circulation desk will still be able to be staffed reasonably. Anyone who needs help with computers or printing, there's still going to be enough people on the floor to take care of all that while you are taking care of this program. And you also want to think about possibly having more than one staff for the program, depending on how many kids you have interested. If it's just one of you and 30 of them, that might get a little out of hand. It might be helpful to have another person in the room with you. And someone who can help with that is possibly volunteers. So that's something you can consider, especially if you get teen volunteers, because that would be really cool for the kids. They like seeing someone who's a little closer to their age helping out with things. So if that is something that you can get going at your library, definitely think about it. Next click. And here's one example for the space bit. We had a virtual reality program at the Inglewood Public Library while I was there. And space-wise, what we had for it was an office, what used to be an office, but we took out most of the furniture and made sure the equipment was basically against the walls. So even though it was kind of a small space, we were still able to make it work with enough room for them to do all the moving around. And this was early on, so we just have one kid here. But later on, we had about a dozen kids every week when we held this program. And just by, making sure the furniture and everything was placed well, we were able to fit in there pretty comfortably. So you can make a lot of creative use out of the spaces that you have available. Next click. So I also wanted to talk about some myths that come with organized play. The first one, I have to be a gamer, which I think is the worst myth ever, because you really don't. And it scares a lot of people off. And I wish that it didn't scare off so many folks. Next click. So the thing is, as we talked about, if you find games that the kids are already interested, maybe already playing, they're going to teach themselves what they need to know. They're going to teach each other what they need to know. And they're going to teach you what you need to know. Next click. So you can really feel free to participate at your own comfort level. So if you want to be the dungeon master when you're doing your tabletop RPGs, and you want to make all the miniatures and write out all the different characters and encounters, you're free to do that. You can definitely do that if you have the time. I don't know how you have the time, but if you do, that's great. But if you don't, that's fine too. You can take a step back and let the kids try to run it, try to figure it out for themselves. And they may not be doing it perfectly, but as long as they're having fun, that's okay. And they'll learn as they go along. Next click. The next myth I wanted to talk about is that it will be chaos. Sometimes people think about kids and games, and all they can see coming from it is arguing and yelling and fighting, and it doesn't really have to be that way. Next click. So a great way to avoid that is just setting clear rules and expectations from the beginning, and also trying to leave room for input from the kids so that they can feel more like the rules are fair. If they have a chance to talk to you about it and have their own say in it as well, they're more likely to want to follow those rules. And a quick example with the virtual reality program, obviously only one kid could use the equipment at a time, but we talked to the kids and we figured out a system where there would be a sign up. So it was just first come, first serve. They had a sign up sheet. When they came, they'd write their name on it. We figured out how much time it would be for each kid to make sure that everyone had enough time to play. And we had some other games in there for them to play while they were waiting. And it worked out. I mean, obviously there were some misunderstandings here and there, but you can always talk to them and work out whatever exceptions there might need to be. Next click. Another thing to avoid chaos is those prerequisites about spacing and staffing. So if you have a small space and like 20 kids in it, that might be something that makes chaos a little more likely. Also, if you have a big space where the kids can kind of wander off into a corner and you don't see what they're doing, that's also something you want to avoid. That could be problematic. So finding that just right size for the amount of kids you have. And also the staffing, as we talked about, if there are a ton of kids and only one of you, that could lead to some problems. So you want to make sure you've got maybe a volunteer or maybe another staff member if there are a lot of kids there. One more click. And I also wanted to mention that, as we've talked a little bit about, excitement does not necessarily equal chaos. With games, there is a tendency for there to be some noise just from the talking and the playing, the laughing. And you want to make sure you can find a space where that's appropriate. And also just keep in mind that just because things are getting a little loud, it doesn't necessarily mean things are getting out of control yet. All right, next click. So level 3, which we talked a little bit about earlier in our first section, is community building. And this might seem like a bit of an exaggeration with the image, but I really feel like the community building that can happen with gaming programs can be kind of revolutionary for kids, having that kind of space where they can connect. Next click. So with community building, I mean inviting the participants to become co-creators in the space. Another click. So giving them agency over the content and the environment. So really letting them become partners in the creation of the gaming programs. Next click. So we'll go through a few examples of that. That could be having kids. Another click. Organize and decorate the game space so that they feel more ownership of it. They kind of have their own personality expressed in it. Another click. They could start a Discord server. So Discord, for those who don't know, it's an online communication platform, kind of like Teams or Slack, if you've used those, where you can have video calls and chats and threads. And the teens can use, or the kids can use that while they're playing, but they can also use it when they go home to continue the conversation, keep the community alive. Next click. You can have the kids run their own gaming programs, like I was saying about volunteers, being the ones who might be a dungeon master or having the kids organize their own game tournaments, and also live streams. If you have a YouTube channel or a Twitch channel, obviously you've got to get the right permission so the kids can be on video. But if they get to have a show where they're playing their own games, that's something that they're going to love for sure. Another click. And then a big one, designing their own games. So using something like Scratch, the online platform from MIT, where you can kind of do coding, but without typing, just using graphical interface instead. A great way to introduce kids to that coding concept and get them to make their own content. One more click. And on that same vein, you can consider bringing in professional mentors into the space, which is something that is also done at UMedia with a lot of their creative activities. So you could bring in a professional game designer or a professional dungeon master, game master, to share those skills with the kids and give them an example of how this can really become a career. And one more click. So just as an example of that kind of community building, at the Boston Public Library for our teen services, we have this Twitch channel, and we like to feature the teens' art on the channel. So this is one of the waiting screens before a game starts. We have some art from one of our teens named WhoFan44. We also have music created by teens. We had a teen music contest earlier in the year. So in the background and during waiting times, we'll have that music going. And then on the right, you can see the chat where the kids are talking to each other, talking to the librarians. There are tons of inside jokes and things that happen. You can create quotes too that you can have the chat bot put out whenever you want to. So basically, it's built into a really cute little community over time, and it's been great seeing that come together. Next click. So that's all for us, the librarian side, as far as advice about what gaming's benefits are and how to put games together. Our next portion will be bringing in our very special guest, author Brittany Morris of the critically acclaimed young adult novel Slay, which deals a lot with gaming, and also the upcoming release, or the new release, The Cost of Knowing. So next we'll have a discussion with Brittany Morris.
Hi, thank you so much. What wonderful presentation so far. I'm going to go ahead and turn on my camera. Oh, Looks like the host isn't, the permissions are not letting me turn on the camera. That's all right though. If everyone's comfortable with that. I don't have a slide deck or anything. I was just gonna speak right to everyone. Jamila, are you okay with that? Okay. All right, cool. I'll just roll with it then. Hi, everyone. Great to be here. My name is Brittany Morris. I am an author, a game developer, and most recently a screenwriter. And I'm here today to talk to you a little bit about the books I've written, the games I've written, and why I'm so passionate about integrating video games into literacy programs in schools and libraries. So wonderful presentation so far, wonderful discussion in the chat, love all of it. And I'm seeing a lot of games that I actually love personally. I saw Dream Daddy go by, I saw Doom go by, so that's great. So yeah, my debut novel is called Slay, and my inspiration for that book actually goes all the way back to my childhood. When I was a kid, I grew up in Corvallis, Oregon, which is in the middle of nowhere. That town shows up on the census as 95% white and 5% Hispanic. So Black people don't even show up on the radar there. I was the only Black kid at my school for most of my childhood. When another one would drift in, people would assume we were related. That's how few of us there were. And so I quickly became the resident Black culture expert at like every grade level. A lot of my classmates would ask me, you know, to teach them certain things about Black culture or speak on behalf of all Black people. They expected me to have eaten certain foods or to listen to certain music, to speak a certain way. One of my classmates even asked me one time to ask them to quote, or to asked me to teach them to quote, speak ghetto. So yeah, that was largely my experience growing up. It was a wild time. Fast forward all the way past college to a life-changing moment when I went to see Black Panther in theaters on opening night. And the reason why that night was so impactful for me was because that was the first time where I walked into a room full of Black people and allowed myself to feel total and unconditional love and acceptance. I didn't feel like I had to ask, you know, am I Black enough? Do I have all the right head knowledge? You know, I spent most of my life questioning, who am I? I felt like I wasn't qualified to speak on behalf of all Black people. And surprise, surprise, I'm still not. That's not a reasonable expectation. And so when I went to see Black Panther that night, I left the theater craving to go back to Wakanda. I wanted that feeling again of just complete acceptance. And I wanted to journey back to this magical universe that I felt like I had lived in for those few hours. And I think something like 72 hours went by and nobody was talking about making Black Panther into a virtual reality video game. And I said, I want nothing more than to be able to feel like I'm there in Wakanda. And so a few days went by and I said, okay, that's it. I don't know what I'm doing. I don't know how to make a video game. I don't know how to make a VR game. However, I'm going to write a book about someone who does know how. And so that was the inspiration for Slay and for Kira's story. So for those who haven't heard of Slay, it is about a 17-year-old game developer named Kira Johnson, who creates a Wakanda-inspired virtual reality video game and has to duel a racist troll using duel cards based on Black culture and Black history. And so for me, video games throughout my life have been a point of self-actualization, self-realization, introspection, all of that good stuff. I had seen, at that point in my life, I had seen so many different indie video games that discussed so many different complex and heavy topics. Just to name a few examples, there is a game called That Dragon Cancer, in which you play through a young couple's story of them providing comfort care for their 2-year-old. It is an extremely heart-wrenching game. It's one of the only games I've ever played that made me cry. And terminal illness is not a topic that you often hear brought up in gaming. A lot of people don't know that heavy topics like that can be or are discussed in video games at all. I've played through games that deal with depression, mental health, self-harm, suicide. I have played through a game that puts you in the shoes of a young child confronting his father's alcoholism, and navigating a world in which he both has to rely on, in the game, his father is a literal monster, a docile version of his father to navigate him through the world and through the map, and also keep him away from his vice so that he does not then become dangerous. And so by the time I saw Black Panther in theaters and, had all of these deep thoughts about, who am I as a Black woman and what makes a strong Black woman? And, why have I been listening to all of these people my entire life tell me what it means to be a strong Black woman? And why haven't I taken the time to decide what that is for myself? All of these big questions were coming up. And so video games just made a lot of sense to look at as a lens through which to communicate that. And so in the book Slay, Kira is also in a similar predicament in which there are multiple people in her life giving her input into what a strong Black woman should look like. So for example, there is a conversation between Kira, the main character, and her sister Steph. Briefly, they mentioned that Kira has natural hair while her sister Steph has relaxed hair. That's been a topic of discussion in the Black community. If you are a strong Black woman, shouldn't you want to wear your hair natural? Or if you are a strong Black woman, should you not care what people think about your hair and wear whatever you like? There are so many topics discussed in Slay, but at its core, it is a message that screams acceptance, radical acceptance of everybody Black. And because there is a deck of cards in the book Slay, my message with that is, even if the entire deck doesn't apply to you, there is at least one card for you in the deck. If you are Black, you are Black enough, that there is space for you in the Black community. And so I am super, super passionate about including video games in literacy programs. I've given keynotes this year even about how many different games there are that celebrate literacy, that encourage quick reading and reward you for spelling words correctly. There are games like Scribble Knots. There are games like that are friendly for the younger crowd. There are games like Cookie Clicker that seem very, very simple on the surface, but then throw you into a dystopian hellscape by the end of it. And so I'm very, very passionate about video games. And because I'm lucky enough to get to be a game developer myself and help create these games and write these narratives, I'm so excited to see library programs across the nation incorporating games into their programs. So thank you all for being here. Thank you for listening. And I believe it's time for questions.
Thank you so much, Brittany. So I have a question for you. So what kind of games did you grow up playing, and what impact do you think they had on you as a reader and writer?
I love that question. So as a kid, I should mention, actually, I was not an avid reader. I was more inclined to play video games than I was to read books. And I think the first video game that I played was the original Mario. And then beyond that, the first story game that I played was actually Super Mario Sunshine. And for me, it was really, really cool to watch Mario go from, a 2D character with a very, with almost no plot behind him to, putting him in the middle of this island in which he's the protagonist of the story, where he has to, basically save his reputation. That took things to a much more interesting level. And to this day, that's one of my favorite video games. And so video games really made me fall in love with story. And that love of story grew and grew and grew until I fell more deeply in love with reading later in life. So
that's fantastic. So, if you're listening, here's part of your elevator speech for, branch managers or administrators, or kind of like, gaming in the library. We don't need to do that. So here's a clear example here. Okay, next question. what are you excited about in the gaming industry right now?
Oh, so many things. Some of which I can't talk about because I'm under an NDA, but I'm working on 2 AAA games that are very just so full of love for the actual player that's going to be playing them. Let me just put it that way. But some really exciting things that I'm seeing in gaming are a broader level of consideration for accessibility. So in the past, it's been very like cut and dry. If you know, need dexterity adaptations, if a controller isn't comfortable enough for you, if I mean, even like for me personally, the PlayStation controller has been an issue because my brain doesn't work with shapes very easily. I work with letters, I work with, numbers even, but the shapes really throw me off. And so there are a whole lot of things in gaming that I think could be made a lot more accessible. Even things like subtitles. A lot of games still, it's not industry standard to include a subtitle option. And so for the hearing impaired, video games can be kind of problematic. And then flashing lights warnings. I'm seeing a lot more games take accessibility into consideration across the board, and I just really, really love that.
Okay. So let's talk a little bit more about the book. You did touch on some of the issues and themes. But what did you think was missing from similar literature that caused you to write it from this perspective?
I love that question. I hadn't really seen any race topics, and specifically racial identity, discussed through the lens of gaming. And I think with VR games in particular, VR games can foster a sense of empathy in the player because you are playing a third person in the shoes of the character game that puts you through whatever they are going through. And so with Slay, I felt like I hadn't really seen that done before. And so I thought it would be a really fun way to talk about my identity as a Black woman, and in the book, Kira's identity as a Black woman, and just drive home the point that kind of nobody gets to tell you how to be who you are. Nobody gets to tell you what being a strong Black person means, except you. And so I wasn't seeing that in publishing, and I thought it was time.
Fantastic. So then, what lessons can we learn about social issues from online gaming communities?
Oh boy, so many. I think with Kira in the book being a game developer, she feels immense responsibility for the online community that she's created. And in part for the containment, I guess, of the troll that's in the game. She's in kind of a tough spot because if she, kicks someone out of the community, then is the game really for everybody Black? But if she lets the troll persist, then what is she doing to protect her community? And I think a lot of game developers are struggling with that balance. With how much do you step in and weed out content that you don't want to see and censor, and then how do you protect the online community that you want to build, and how do you protect the gamers that are playing your games? And I think there's also a narrative in the book about safe spaces and why it's so important to let everyone have a space in which they feel seen, in which they feel safe, and in which they have helpful representation, like meaningful representation. And so I think for all of those reasons, the book addresses a lot of different social topics. There's also the topic of online anonymity, in which people feel very comfortable saying just about anything, and how Kira approaches that topic. So I covered a lot in the book.
Indeed, you did. And a lot of the things are very relevant to kind of the work we do in libraries, especially around issues of inclusivity. So what are some of the barriers, if any, that prevent kids from getting excited about gaming, and what can we do to change that?
I love that question. I mean, there are several things. The first thing that comes to mind is the cost alone. The cost of consoles, most of you know, has skyrocketed. When we got our first console, we being my brother and I, it was a Nintendo GameCube that had Super Mario Sunshine that came free with it, and the whole package, brand new, was $99. Now you can find some games that are $99. And so cost alone is a large barrier to entry. And then, of course, you have, free games out there. But if we're talking about a lot of the bigger games, they also have microtransactions where the game itself might be free, but then once you join in the game, there are outfits and weapons and upgrades and emotes and different things that you can buy. And so all of those things they make for constant barriers to entry, even when you jump into the game and start playing. And I think with libraries specifically, there are so many options for free games. A lot of them were mentioned in the presentation, so I won't repeat those, but there are also a lot of browser games. There are games like Undertale, which is very story heavy. And I don't want to say sweeping appropriate for all audiences, but I don't remember any glaringly alarming content in that game. There are games like Cookie Clicker that I mentioned before. So there are a lot of different options, especially with older games that are on older consoles or for PC, they're older. Those prices for those games tend to be a lot lower. So there are ways around the cost, but I don't think there's anything we can really do to reduce the cost of games with the direction that it's going in the industry. And then another barrier to entry is also just the gatekeeping that goes on in gaming. There's, especially in online communities, you'll encounter the one-off person that's still in 2021 saying things like, oh, you just play mobile games? That's not really a game, a game. You can't call yourself a gamer. You have to log 900 hours in Call of Duty or don't even talk to me. And I am here to tell everyone on this call that we don't claim them. That narrative has to die, and it's on its way out. Thank goodness. Yeah, those are the two big ones. They can't sit with us. I love that. Someone in the chat said they can't sit with us.
Awesome. All righty. So for everyone that's on this call, right, from your perspective, what can libraries do to get kids more excited about gaming? So you touched on a little bit about the like kind of the gatekeeping, and kids can sometimes be part of that too. So what can we do from your perspective to get kids more excited?
Oh, I love that. I think so many kids are already excited about games. I know, I can only speak from when I was a kid because I don't have children who are school age. So I've been a little bit far removed from actual schools thanks to the pandemic. So when I was a kid, I remember video games being seen as kind of the antithesis of literacy and the antithesis of success in school. And so I feel like if you can just get the word out that video game options are a thing in your library, that's half the battle. Carrying books about games, allowing checkout of specific game download keys. I don't know about the expiration date on those, if that's an option. And so I don't know about how to return said gaming keys. That's probably a question for somebody more involved in an actual library. I'm sorry. But if there's space hosting, game centers and libraries, as Ritze pointed out, and especially games that feature literacy-centric or story-based games. I've named a few. For anyone who would like even more recommendations, feel free to jump into my Twitter DMs. I could talk about video games all day long. Those are just some top-of-mind ideas. But also I'm seeing a whole lot of libraries incorporate games into their programs, and it just tickles me to see it. I love it so much. So thank you, anybody who is considering incorporating video games into your programs or has already done so. It's great to see.
Thank you so much, Brittany. Unfortunately, we are nearing our time. So I want to see if there are any questions from the participants in chat. They are making comments about what we can do, promote it more, respond to their excitement about gaming in the first place. There is a culture of complaints about kids on computers just playing games in the library, right? Build displays around gaming, host tournaments, which is always awesome. And just more around some folks thinking or, explaining that there's a culture around computer use where we try and treat the computers like they should be mostly for homework. So snacks. Thank you so much for this. So I am going to wrap up here. I would like to again thank our panelists today. Brittany, thank you. I wish we had much more time to chat. Thank you, Riche and Annalisa, for your presentations. And I also would be remiss if I did not thank the Public Libraries Committee of BCALA. These phenomenal people have added input and ideas and helped make this possible. And then if you are interested in following or connecting more with the panelists, here are the social media handles here. For Brittany, Riche, I love your Twitter handle at Two Eye Glass Chains, and Annalisa, Rosie Shepherdess. And then finally, I would like to invite you to join BCALA. So there's some information here about how you can join, and we'll try to drop that link in chat. And if you have any comments, questions, concerns, or you just want to chat more about things you would like to see, you can contact the School Libraries Committee Chair, Karen Lemons, or myself, Tamala Chambers, as the committee chairs. So thank you again. We do have a post-event survey that we would like for you to complete. So I will stop sharing my screen and get that in chat now. And we very much value your feedback. So one moment and I will put that link out now. I have put the link in chat, and thank you all again for coming, and hope to see you again soon.